Hey everyone, Adam here, So Was Her Podcast. I have another interview for you today. This is with Edwin P Stevens. He's a documentary filmmaker. He's actually a cinematographer by trade, which really comes through in this documentary he made because it's very technically well made. Visually, the way it's shot, the sound mix, everything. It's filmmaker quality for his first documentary, and this one really hits close to home for Edwin. It could not hit closer to home, really. A number of years ago, Edwin's sister was murdered pretty senselessly, and he had a hard time, understandably, coping with it and trying to make sense of it. So he undertook this documentary, and we go into the how and the why and everything, but he faces this massive tragedy head on, and the amount of strength and resilience this would take, it's unbelievable. It's a very compelling documentary. It's a very compelling story. And the documentary does this nice thing where it focuses on Alice. I'm sorry, the documentary is called Alice is Still Dead. Alice was Edwin's sister. The documentary focuses on Alice as a person, but then it also gets into the crime and then the kind of ripple effect afterwards. So it's really well done, really well balanced, and you really feel for the family and you feel for Alice. Alice is Still Dead is available now. I really recommend you check it out, especially after hearing Edwin's story from himself. So I'll shut up and we can get into it. Hey everyone, Adam here, So Was Your Podcast. I'm sitting down with Edwin Stevens to talk about his documentary, Alice is Still Dead. How you doing, Edwin?
I'm doing all right. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Definitely. This is a pretty intense one, so I guess why don't you start with telling everybody what Alice is Still Dead is about.
So Alice was my little sister, and she was murdered 8 years ago. She was 24, and it was, a really horrible thing. She was just an innocent victim of this horrendous crime, and it kind of just tore my whole world apart. And our family just really struggled with, and are still kind of struggling with coming to terms with it. And the film is an exploration of grief for the most part, but it does have a large chunk of the film is about Alice and who she was, and remembering her, keeping her memories alive, and kind of creating new ones too. I was able to interview a whole bunch of people that I didn't really know very well, or some I didn't know at all, from Alice's life, and kind of created new memories that way, which was therapeutic for me. But the film was about Alice, who she was, what happened to her, and where that leaves, the her family in the wake of her passing. And grief is something that if we are lucky enough to live long enough, we are going to deal with someone that we know dying, right? And it's not something that we talk about a whole lot. So I thought it was important to delve into that subject and explore it, and be open and honest about what it's like when it happens, and hope that other people can take something from that, and in their own lives when either they themselves or a friend of theirs is going through grief.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot to take on. So what was the process like going from, obviously you're carrying this around for a while, it's something you'll have forever, as you said. Where did the idea to do a documentary come into it?
It kind of stemmed from the fact that there was just a lot of waiting around for the legal system to get their ducks in a row, and there were 2 years there before, 2.5 years before we ever saw a trial for one of the two murderers, and just had a really hard time standing idly by, not making progress, not being proactive about, confronting my demons, so to speak, that are associated with the crime and Alice's loss. And so this was kind of started out as therapeutic art for me. I just really wanted to get my thoughts down and remember Alice and create something beautiful in her memory. But then it turned into something more, where we followed the true crime aspect of the story, of the case, of the trial. We were able to shoot in the courtroom and really peel back the curtain so that people, can see what it's like. The film really puts you in the victim's family shoes, because I am the victim's family and I made it, right? So it really is like a first person exploration of what it's like.
Absolutely, and you do feel that while watching it. You really feel connected to everything, and I thought it was a good choice to focus entirely on who she was as a person for like the first at least half of it, because it really gets you in that mind space of it's not facts on a sheet, it's not a news report.
Yeah, I think that gets lost sometimes, and I enjoy a good true crime film, a mystery, a murder mystery, But the important thing that I think we all forget is that there are real people left in the wake of these crimes, and I don't think rarely do we ever hear from the victims' families. And I thought that this, film really um, could fill that void.
Yeah. The style of the documentary, was that something you had in your head up front, or as you uncovered layers did it kind of just evolve into what you ended up with?
You know, I'm a cinematographer by trade, so I really wanted to juxtapose Alice's innocence and her beauty against like nature and beautiful time lapses of sunsets and things, and how we're all connected in this circle of life, right? So it kind of just stemmed from, that's like my wheelhouse, is just creating images. And then as we went on, some of the grittier aspects of the film um, became necessary to tell the story, right? Because it is a gritty, raw story. So it's an interesting mixture stylistically. You're right that it's like trying to you know portray the beauty of life, and that there's still hope out there, there's still beautiful things in the world, but then there is also this darkness and evil that touched us, and then trying to create some kind of balance of the two.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to ask this in the wrong way or sound callous, so please don't take it that way if I do. But when it comes to the more horrific aspects of the case itself, how was stepping into those waters to get it for the documentary? Because you wanted to get it for the movie, obviously, and it was a big part of the story. It just kind of, how did you wrap your head around taking that on?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, at first we reached out to the local news stations and got all that footage, which, you know, those are the I lived on the other side of the country from where she lives. So those news reports brought everything back, because that's how I really found out about it. I heard about it from my mother, but was kind of in disbelief until I saw, multiple news stories, and oh yeah, that's her house and that's her car, and that must have been her. And then as the years went on, and became kind of friends with the people who are associated with the case, the brilliant detective, that the chief of police that solved the case, and the prosecutor who prosecuted the case. We became friends, and they helped me out a little bit with obtaining some of the things that are seen in the film. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to have it around. I mean, I'd be looking at the film, and then just going through it, and if you just stop on the wrong frame, you see something horrific, and it just it was tough to do that. But I really thought that it was essential to have some of these grisly details, because we read a lot, and like we've mentioned already a few times, that there are so many true crime stories out there, and they're very popular, but a lot of the time I don't feel like we build up that this was a real human. Like they're not very humanized in a lot of these cases. And I wanted to humanize Alice, and then unfortunately we show the graphic details about what happened to her, and I think it's really effective, because for some reason we can hear about what happened, and it's just not as effective as visually just landing on it and seeing it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Your brain can kind of compartmentalize things.
Mhm. Yeah, agreed.
So as far as getting the news footage, the 911 calls, you had a lot of pictures and good. I don't want to say good and bad. I didn't mean it like that, but like positive pictures about her life, but also the more crime related pictures. Was it hard to get all of that content together?
Took a lot of effort, but it was kind of just, I mean, this is the first film I've directed, and I've always wanted to direct something, but I just didn't wasn't super passionate about one project. And in order to see it through from beginning to end, you need to have that passion. And this is something that was on my mind every day anyways, so it was pretty easy to just dive into it and get immersed into the process. And so it didn't seem so bad, because it was kind of what I was thinking about anyways. But you're right, it did take a lot of phone calls, a lot of digging through old photo books and things to get the right photos and scanning everything in. And it did take a lot of effort to get everything together.
Yeah, for like something like a news footage, when you call, do you just say, "Oh, hey, I'm Edwin Stevens. This is what happened. This was the dates I'm looking for," and they just say, "Oh, sure, we'll shoot it over." Did you have to, get things, to show that you are who you say you are and all that?
Well, for news footage, it's kind of that was somehow it was the easiest part of it. So we kind of went through the maze of trying to find it, and no one had any answers. And then finally, we just showed up at the front desk of one of the news stations. They're like, "Oh, you just go to this website, and it's here. You can purchase it." So that was
Oh,
actually
okay.
easy in the long run, but getting the answer about where to find it was difficult for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because you had a lot of archival stuff that's like this happened almost a decade ago. It's amazing that you have all of this.
Yeah, we started collecting it, I guess, 3 or 4 years in, and I was pretty lucky because I think at about 5 years they archive it, and it's more difficult to find. And I was lucky that whoever was pulling things for me, who had never met me but saw my last name and saw who the victim was very, very helpful and kind of went above and beyond and said, you know what, I think there's some other things that you didn't even find on the website that I'm just going to pull for you. And so it was nice that there were a lot of very nice people that helped, and people who knew me gave up a lot of their time and energy to be interviewed. And it's not a fun interview to talk about your dead friend or your dead family member, but they all did it and were very glad to do so. And all the way down to these random people that I had never met and probably never will. And it was really, that was kind of a silver lining in making this very difficult film, was to see that there is humanity left and that there are good people out there who want to help and are on board.
Absolutely, yeah. It's nice that you found some positivity in the journey because I'm sure it was daunting.
Yes, definitely.
When you were first gathering the information, you said it was about 3 or 4 years in. Were you gathering it just in the back of your mind? You're kind of like, we should just have this to have it, or was it for the documentary?
Um, some of the things I just kind of lucked out on because, like for instance, I never had any thought that I would need footage of the funeral, for instance, right? I thought it was absurd that family friends were videotaping it as like a memory. It seemed very odd, but it ended up being essential. Like it's a very crucial scene, I think, in the film. Um, but no, the film really did start as just like I want to remember Alice, and then just kind of gained momentum and it evolved into this other thing. And so I did just kind of keep grabbing pieces as we went along. And we realized, hey, you know what, this is going to be bigger than this short, remembrance film that I wanted to make initially.
Hmm. So initially you set out to make a much smaller project, and it became a kind of true crime documentary.
I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be, but nothing just felt like enough. I mean, how do you
Mhm.
put, even in 90 minutes, how do you put someone's, 24 years of life and cramp it down into 90 minutes? It's a tough job. And luckily I had a fantastic editor who did a great job with the film, Meredith Mantic. And, but yeah, initially I just wanted to make a short because I just didn't know if I could pour this much energy and time into it. And then I just kind of got obsessed with it, and it snowballed, and it became what it became.
Yeah, it seems almost I can't think of the word, almost like fate intervened for you to have the profession you have, and you just started laying the foundation for the documentary before you knew that it was going to be a documentary. It seems kind of amazing that it came together that way.
Yeah, it does seem that way. And, I've worked on a lot of films, and certainly people were a lot more willing to help out with this one. They felt that it was an important thing for me, and hopefully for other people who can relate or going through similar tragedies. and they really wanted to help, and people didn't want to be paid. It was really insane. It was really really great.
No, that is good to hear. As far as Alice's stuff, because you have a lot of her journal entries and things like that, that in context of the film is very almost telling, like not like she was prophesying, but it just all the pieces were falling in, with hindsight, of course. Were those the key to finding her friends that you might not have known at all, or maybe just heard of in passing?
Yes, certainly. I mean, people that she wrote about, I wanted to meet definitely. And like I said, I lived in California and she was in Georgia, and so we didn't really have a lot of intersection there. So yeah, once I started investigating, the journals were a good place. Going to Facebook and looking at who her friends were, trying to figure out, oh, I do remember her talking about this person. I should look them up and see if they'd want to do it, if they want to be interviewed. And just I kind of exhausted every idea that I had about how to how to find people to interview. We interviewed 40 plus people, and maybe 12 of them made it in, and it's so difficult because all 40 were wonderful. It's just some of them just didn't fit the style or whatever. And keeping track of 40 characters would have been too many. But it really was a blessing just how many people wanted to share their stories, and it made me feel better because the nature of the crime was so horrific and personal, and everyone kind of questioned, was she into something that she shouldn't have been, like was she, because, and I think also it's human nature to want her to have been doing something that she shouldn't have been, so that it makes a little bit of sense what happened to her. And fortunately for her memory, she's completely innocent, and unfortunately for feeling safe ourselves, it was just it could kind of happen to anyone, unfortunately.
Yeah, those
But
are really good points. Not to mean like I was casting judgment, but watching your documentary is like, okay, well, the next bit about the crime has to be the next layer, like it goes deeper, but
right.
not to say it's
Mhm.
not deep. It's great, just like what you were saying, just reiterating really, but it's fascinating and scary. But I guess for, like you said, for her memory, it's also maybe a silver lining that no, things weren't that bad. She was just kind of wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, and the fact that 40 some people took time out of their day and shared these, went through the pain of reliving things and sharing these beautiful memories of her, just made me realize, no, she really was who I thought she was. She was a beautiful person, and it just, unfortunately, this horrible thing happened to her.
Yeah, that is tremendous to have 40 people have
Yeah,
positive, glowing things to say about your sister.
yeah, it was really nice.
It's
Another silver.
also, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. It's just another silver lining. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting that you mentioned because, watching it, of course, I've given the final version, so I don't see, all the hundreds of hours of footage that didn't make it in. Uh, but the fact that you refer to them as characters, because in the context of a movie, it's what they would be. Um, it's really interesting to think that there's so many more people, but as you're watching it, it never feels like it's lacking. It was, I don't know, credit to the editing, I guess, or the narrative of the truth.
Yeah, she did. I mean, Meredith just did a fantastic job choosing the right people to tell the story. And a lot of the questions, when you go into an interview, I think that for the most part, it's custom to the person. But there's certain questions you ask everyone. How did you know her? What is a great memory of her? How did you hear what happened? How did it affect you? Those kinds of things. And so teasing out kind of the best answers out of the main questions that are asked of everyone, and figuring out who answers this question the best out of 45 possible answers, um, probably was helpful. But I'm speaking for Meredith out of turn, and just having a good blend of people and backgrounds and genders, and just showing that Alice really affected all kinds of different people, I think was really important.
Yeah, absolutely. For gathering all the footage and doing all these interviews, how long was this whole process from kind of the actual conception when you knew like this is going to be a documentary to this is my final cut?
I think that I think I started making the film when it was just a little project for myself, about a year after the murder. And then it really kind of picked up steam and became a bigger film as I just kept thinking, this isn't quite right. This isn't quite what I want to do. I want to make something with her memory that affects other people. And right now, this is just for me, really, right? So I really just wanted to keep going deeper and deeper and trying to find something that could affect others. But yeah, I think it took somewhere around 3.5 years, from when I decided I'm going to make a film. I've been thinking about it. I'm just going to do it, and then until it was finally finished and ready to submit to film festivals. But the crazy thing is, there's footage in there of like when she was 3 months old or something, right? So really, the film was being made for like 30 years, without even really realizing it.
That's true. It's a really good point. As you were going through and you're doing your project, because you mentioned early on that the case itself, the legal proceedings took years, which was also really shocking to hear in the documentary. At one point, you're on the phone and you're 4.5 years later, and they're finally starting to talk about it. It's insane. Um, did that constantly change? Maybe not your overall structure, but oh, now we have to get this bit of information. Now we have to fit this in.
Yes, it did. And the crazy part about that was, for the second trial, there were a lot of pieces of evidence that were just thrown out from they tried the two criminals as separate entities, not a joint case. Um, so unfortunately, anything that was really related to the first guy, and it was kind of an open and closed case for him, didn't necessarily relate to the second guy. And some of it was like, well, no one said him by name, so you have to throw him out. So a lot of this testimony and things got thrown out for the second case, and it was a lot scarier. So there was maybe a year there where we were wondering what the verdict was going to be. I mean, it really felt like it could go either way. And there was even a portion, during the trial where it didn't seem like it was going very well, and we almost agreed to a plea, that would have gotten him out on manslaughter, and after 10 years, which is it's super scary to reflect on now. And thank God it didn't happen. But it really was a film that was constantly evolving because the story was evolving in real life, in real time.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's just the timeline. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. I can only imagine living it. That you don't have any real answers for half a decade. It just has to weigh so heavy. I'm not sure. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but
Well, the interesting thing is, I feel like I still don't have a lot of answers that I would like to have. But, short of the incarcerated coming out and just admitting it and telling them the whole story, I don't think I'll ever have those answers. And they'll never do that because there's always a chance that they could, they do not have parole options, but there's always a chance that some kind of plea could come out, and then they could try to, uh, reverse the verdicts. So they're never going to admit it. And, I just, accepting that I won't know what I don't know was a really difficult but essential thing to come to terms with.
yeah, that's also a really good point, both for you as her brother and as a filmmaker.
Right.
You just have to accept early on that you're never going to have 100% of the puzzle.
Yeah. Unfortunately not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really insightful, like all these things, because as I said, you sit there, you watch it as an audience member, and you get what the documentary is getting across, but it's scratching the surface.
Yeah. Again, it's crazy, because you're fitting in her whole life plus the aftermath of her death, which is, what, 5 years of filmmaking. So trying to fit all those emotions and things that happen in between. It was tough to do in 90 minutes. And, but again, I think it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Through this whole process and having it out in the world and being able to, talk to people or have people hear your full complete story, not just a 3-minute news segment, did it help alleviate any of the weight on you?
100%. I mean, I think, having people, well, first of all, like when it happened, like, people reach out to you to give you their condolences, but people didn't know what to say. I mean, I've never had a friend or murdered. I wouldn't know what to do either. I don't blame them, but it kind of felt very lonely. And being able to talk to people and hear that they were grieving and that they were super upset about it, even though they weren't reaching out and telling me, that was important. That made me feel very good. Yeah, sorry, I forgot what the original question was.
I was just asking. I mean, obviously, it'll never be like, oh, and now I feel better and I'm okay. But just through the whole process, and now it's out in the world, your completed
Right.
film. Did that kind of help you process things a little bit more?
Oh, 100%. I mean, more than a little bit for sure. It definitely did its duty as therapy for me. And just being able to talk about her with so many different people, like we're saying, and hearing so many great stories about her, that was really nice. That warmed my heart and made me, feel a little bit more whole. Um, and being able to share who she was with so many people now that never knew her. I mean, that's a blessing as well. So that makes me feel good. And just, there have been people who've like reached out to me on Instagram and have been like, "Oh my gosh, I lost my sibling, and I totally related to everything that you're talking about." I got, the despair. I got the part about like, well, thinking about afterlife and what's next and where are they. And it was really nice to connect with other people on that level and know that I wasn't the only one experiencing these things and thinking these dark thoughts. So I think, moving through the film with like complete and sometimes terrifying honesty really paid off in that way, that people were able to connect, and they're still reaching out, and that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, that is nice. Did you find it was I hate to use the word easier, but did you find it was easier to talk about it as frankly and as openly the more interviews and the more information you got and then the further you pressed on?
It was interesting. Yes, I think so. And I don't think I could probably do this interview about her without being a mess. Before I did the film, I think it did help me come a long way into dealing with things and knocking down walls and having those moments in other ways. Um, but yeah, it really has helped change my outlook for sure.
No, that is good to hear that it had a positive outcome as horrific
Mhm.
as everything was leading up to it. What
Yeah,
would
it did get easier to talk, but the interesting thing is, you kind of go into like interview mode, and now it's a job, right? It's just like, I make films. That's what I do. So it was interesting to have, I'm not completely losing my personality and my emotions, but at the same time, you do address it a little more formally, and depending on who you're interviewing. I mean, some people it's just impossible to not cry with them or things like that. But it did get easier, and then knowing that, it's okay to cry, it's okay to let out this grief and this emotion, and to share it with each other. That became easier, because at first that was very scary for me to try to, be super honest about my emotions in front of other people, while interviewing them. Right? You want to be stoic for them because they're the ones who are really sharing.
mm,
But having that shared experience with them actually, made people feel more comfortable. Surprisingly, you would think that, breaking down things in front of other people would be uncomfortable, but actually, having that shared experience it did give some comfort and some rapport at times.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Not just to tell your sister's story, but what else would you like to see people take away from this?
You know, there's a couple things. I mean, it really, like, when it comes down to it, it's just, Alice woke up that day and, probably took a shower and went out and bought groceries, and, she went out to dinner with her boyfriend that night and came home and had no idea that that was going to be the last moment in her life. Right. So just knowing that, just like the brevity of life is so apparent, right? When you think about that, and I hope that people see that and realize that, we take so much for granted, and I'd really like to use my time here wisely, and to not waste time like I know we all tend to when we have the opportunity. Um, you know, just that life is short, and also, again, I'd really hope that people connect with the brutal honesty in the film about what it's like to grieve, and that you know um, people who are supporting people who are grieving, you kind of have a little bit of insight of what they might be going through, and how to approach them or help them or be patient with them, and even furthermore, the people who are going through the grief, I think, need to be more patient with themselves, and again, just realizing that it's okay to be honest about how you're feeling. You don't always have to compartmentalize. It's pretty harmful usually to do that, and that you'll have more success in the long run of kind of processing and getting through the grief if you let it exist.
Absolutely. You're a really strong man to be able to take all of this on, and to tell your sister's story is amazing, and everything you just said about the wider things that people will get from this is just the fact that you were able to think about all of that while taking this on is incredible. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Can you tell everybody where they can see it and anything else you want to point them to, if there's a website, social media, whatever?
Sure. People are welcome to follow me on Instagram. I'm at Edwin P Stevens. And the film is on iTunes for rent or purchase. You can also find it on Tubi TV, which is a free app. You just have to sign up and maybe watch a few ads, and then you can watch the film for free. So that might be probably the easiest and certainly the least expensive way to watch it. So that might appeal to people.
Great. Well, Edwin, thank you again. My condolences for sure, but I do think the fact that you made this and you got through it is incredible.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's. I feel like you called me strong, which is really it's very flattering. I never felt strong, and it really has changed my view of what strength is. Because I think we have this, or I had this idea that it's like this machismo, like I'm not going to let anything affect me. I'm strong. But then I think actually, my new definition is having the courage to let it affect you, and to deal with it. I think that's actually somehow um, even more courageous strength. So I hope that other people can take something from that, and from that model.
I'd like to thank Edwin one more time for taking the time to come on and talk to me about this documentary, for being able to talk about the documentary and having made the documentary. Again, just tremendous strength of character. Edwin's a fascinating guy. It's amazing he was able to put all of this together, and I can't thank him enough for telling his story, for getting this kind of thing out there, and for taking time out of his busy schedule to talk to us personally about it. As I said, Alice is Still Dead is available now. Edwin gave you a few places where you can watch it, but just to reiterate, on Tubi with a free account, it is free with some ads. Or you could throw them a few bucks and rent it on Amazon or something. The rentals are very affordable and very worth it. Please remember to like and subscribe. We have a lot more new movie coverage, interviews, all that kind of stuff coming your way. I'm going to be ramping up the content again very soon, as some personal projects are slowing down, so you're not going to want to miss out. Also, make sure you listen to So Wizard Podcast every single week wherever you get your podcast. So Wizard Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows. SoWizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, merchandise, videos, and more. We love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments or leave us something on social media. A more personal note, I have a comedy comic series out. I don't want to spend a long time plugging it after such serious subject matter. It seems a little disingenuous. Our comic is at socialstudiescomic.com for a little bit of levity. Thank you.